Greetings, bibliophiles, and welcome back to The Book Thing. It has been a little while since the last one of these, but partly that's because I've been busy with my gaming channel and I've actually been trying to kickstart streaming as a more regular thing as well. But also partly it's just been procrastination, good old-fashioned plain procrastination. So here we are, this is me making an attempt to at least get through my backlog, although it's not a very big backlog. I've got 2 books to talk about, which I won't do both today, but I think I probably said this at the start of the last video as well. But anyway, yeah, and I've got a third that I'm nearing the end of, so I'll have that to talk about relatively soon as well. So the book I'm going to cover today is Everything Belongs to the Future by Laurie Penny. And this was quite interesting. I bought this one having heard of Laurie Penny, but not really knowing what to expect. I've not really read anything of hers outside of 1 or 2 bits of her journalism stuff. So this was a bit of a blind buy in that regard, because if you remember, I'm pretty sure I did say this in a previous video, I basically bought a whole bunch of books with the purpose of getting some that were from authors I wasn't necessarily familiar with. And I was also making a conscious effort to get some stuff from some female authors as well, because looking back at, all the sci-fi books I've read, a vast preponderance of them are from male authors, and in part that's because the era I like, there weren't really that many published female authors, which is an issue in of itself, but it means that that's then kind of coloured my taste towards present day fiction, and maybe not searching out for female authors as much as I should be. So that's what I made the effort to do this time, and this was one of the books that I bought as a result. So to start off with, I'll give you a brief summary. I won't be reading an excerpt of this one just because I couldn't really pick out a particular part to read out, because it's not a very long book. It's either a very short novel or a long novella. It's basically about just over 100 pages in the paperback. So it's not a particularly long novel, but it's as long as it needs to be. That's not really a criticism, that's just an observation. It really didn't take me that long to get through. So what it's about is a depiction of a future Britain where there has been the discovery of an anti-aging drug, basically. And so that's the background for everything that happens in this particular story, because it's at the same time both quite narrow in scope, and yet also the things that happen in it actually have some really big consequences for this world. So it's interesting in that regard. It's kind of got a duality going on, where you've got this almost it's almost like a kind of like a play kind of a feel to it, where you've got a fairly small number of actors, if I can use that word, and you've got these various set pieces that they go through, and it's all very quite is melodramatic the right word? I don't know, but maybe. Yeah, everything is of import, and everything is everything's very full of meaning. There's very little not filler, but there's very little kind of building up of who the characters are outside of what's immediately happening to them, if that makes any sense at all. It's basically got quite a laser focus on just the events of the book. We don't really get a lot of, well, here's this character and you follow them for a bit and learn a bit about them. No, it's all very much through the lens. It's all very much through the lens of this one particular, very definite, very self-contained story. I did, by the way, detect maybe a slight homage to a John Wyndham novel of years past, The Trouble with Lichen, because the origin of the anti-aging drug that was discovered by actually one of the protagonists, because you start off with meeting this little group of anarchists in Oxford. I didn't even say where it's set, but it's set in future Oxford towards the end of the 21st century, and it's very kind of again, there's a duality going on. You've got lots of Oxford being very kind of run down and squalid, and then you've got the university precincts where you've got all the privileged rich students, and it's basically, like a whole separate other world, and you're hopping back and forth between them, so there's this real juxtaposition. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, the homage to John Wyndham. So it basically states at one point that this the compound that forms the core of this drug was discovered in a Scottish lichen, and I can't remember if it was specifically in fact it was either the Hebrides or the Northern Isles. I remember smiling at that bit because it's more or less my neck of the woods. Orkneys, I'm pretty sure it was the Orkneys. Anyway, there you go. That's a complete aside. But I can't remember if that was specifically the case in The Trouble with Lichen. But The Trouble with Lichen, you could almost read as kind of like a precursor of this book, because that novel covers the discovery of an anti-aging drug that is derived from a kind of lichen, and the beginnings of the social upheavals that entails. Whereas everything belongs to the future, and this is all, decades past. That's all history by that point. But of course, people have been taking the drug, so there are a lot of people who were around at that point. But it's not a happy future as a result of this drug having been discovered. It's stratified society even more. So the haves and the have-nots are now, the haves have a lot of extra life, and the have-nots, cannot afford this drug at all, and so money has accumulated even more at the top of society. So there's a lot of social commentary going on in this book, and there's a lot of gender commentary going on in this book as well, which is, knowing the little bit that I knew about Laurie Penny, not at all unexpected. And I'm not gonna. How can I say this? It's not that it feels particularly obtrusive or anything. I mean, it really does fit in with everything else that's going on, and it's a very kind of honest account of the various relationships of the characters, with gender thrown in, which you could almost maybe see a lot of books leaving out, which maybe you could consider that to be unrealistic, in fact. But at the same time, it comes off as a very sharp book, if I can put it that way. If you're expecting this to be a nice, cozy, comfortable read, and to just flick through it and to not really have to maybe think about things in response to what's going on in the book, that's not the kind of book this is at all. This is a book that's trying to prod you and poke you into maybe giving consideration to some things that you don't maybe necessarily ordinarily give consideration to. But it's the fact that all that's happening in the midst of this, far future, well, not far future, but decades hence story, and it's a little bit jarring, if that makes any sense at all. But I don't know, maybe I'm just, again, maybe this is going back to what I was saying at the start. I'm just so not used to reading this kind of thing in my sci-fi that it then does stand out in that particular way. But I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's not a cozy, comfortable tale. It absolutely isn't. Which again is a contrast to The Trouble with Lichen, where although it is in a way one of Wyndham's cozy catastrophes because of the sheer upheaval that begins to erupt as a result of the discovery of the anti-aging drug. At the same time, it's got that kind of cozy 1950s sensibility to it, where it kind of, you think, well, it's causing upheaval now, but everything will be fine in the end, right? It's got that kind of vaguely optimistic tone to it, which this absolutely does not have. This is a very, is bleak the right word? I don't know. It's a very uncompromising tale. It doesn't try and bend itself to be a happy story or a sad story. It's just, I don't know, a morality tale, I suppose. And that then comes back to it maybe being more like a stage play than anything else. I could absolutely see this being a stage play, just in terms of its structure, in terms of the story being told. So anyway, yeah, it's an interesting book, and I don't know if it's kind of hard to recommend it beyond that point, beyond saying that it's interesting and it made me think a bit. In terms of being some kind of amazing original story, I don't know that I would qualify it that way, but it was still interesting. I really can't think of a better word than that. It was an interesting read, and it did poke and prod me a little bit to think about things that I haven't necessarily thought about for in relation to science fiction. So in that regard, it was good, but just in the regard of being a sci-fi story, I don't know. Maybe it was just the format, the fact that it kind of sits awkwardly between being a short novel or a long novella. It kind of felt like, I mean, I did say that maybe it was as long as it needs to be, but maybe it could have had a bit more space to stretch its legs in terms of developing the world that we see, because it really is a very narrow slice of this particular future, despite one of the characters being very intimately connected with how this particular future came about. So yeah, if it has a flaw, it's that. And maybe you could also say it's a flaw that none of the characters are particularly likable. Some of them are relatable, but I didn't particularly... I don't know, I wasn't on anybody's side when I was reading this. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be. I don't know. You know, everybody had their own reasons for doing what they were doing, even if they weren't necessarily great reasons. They were understandable reasons. They were human reasons. So, yeah, I don't know. It was interesting. I keep coming back to that, but I really can't think of anything better to say about it. So, that was Everything Belongs to the Future by Laurie Penny. Cautious recommendation. You may enjoy it, but as I've said, I'm not sure it's really a book about enjoyment so much as it is about maybe making you think about things a bit differently than you had before. So, yeah, a cautious recommendation on this one. So hopefully you've found this little review interesting or helpful. If you have, you can leave any comments below. You can hit the like or dislike button, as the case may be. You can sub to this or my gaming channel if you haven't already. And, as always, stay tuned for more.